Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 96. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video, we are going over the third out of 4 gimmicky teams, since Team 32, Team 64, and now Team 96 are all gimmick teams, and then Team 128 will be the final, most gimmickiest of all the gimmickiest gimmick teams. And today's team is pretty gimmicky by the looks that you can probably see. The Smeargle is already crazy. But today's idea is that we are going to be using the PP reducing mechanics that are in the Pokemon game in order to make it so that the opponent's moves run out of PP, and then when your opponent can't use their attacking moves, it's kind of functionally like their Pokemon are dead. And so we have several different ways of lowering PP on the team, but we're going to start off by talking about Smeargle, who's not specifically lowering Pokemon's PP, but it is forcing the opponent to struggle, because Smeargle is going to be using the move Imprison, which is not a move that we've had so far, but Imprison allows you to make it so that any move that this Pokemon knows can no longer be used by the opponent's Pokemon. And usually you see this specifically with Trick Room and Protect, which is partially why we have both of those moves on Smeargle, so that we can block the opponent from going for Trick Room or Protect to allow our more offensive Pokemon in order to just do a lot of damage outside of Trick Room. Mostly just the Indeedee is the one who doesn't want to be in Trick Room, but it also means that the opponent is going to struggle defensively if we get off the Imprison with Smeargle, because they will not be able to protect. And just a side note that the Imprison Protect strategy is why you tend to see the move Detect being run on some Pokemon, just because it is more optimal, because there are less Pokemon that have the ability to Imprison Detect. Even though Detect has less PP than Protect, it's kind of optimal to run Detect because of Imprison Protect. Fun fact. But the thing that really brings this Smeargle together is the fact that Smeargle can use Ditto/Mew's signature move, Transform, which whenever you use Imprison and then you click Transform into a Pokemon, you now have all of that Pokemon's moves specifically, so you immediately force that Pokemon to not be able to move on the turn if it moves after Smeargle, and then the Pokemon is forced to struggle if it wants to get off a move. So on our Smeargle, we are going to be an own tempo Smeargle, so that we are hopefully not getting confused by the opponent, but also Technician doesn't really have any value here since we don't have any attacking moves, and the Moody doesn't, it's kind of risky to be Moody, because if you get the speed drop off of Moody, then you're underspeeding something that you want to transform into, and they're going to hit you, and we're focused specifically so that we can hopefully take one attack as one of our other Pokemon can support the Smeargle by hopefully knocking it out or putting it to sleep with a Mungus, and then Smeargle will get off the Imprison, and then on the next turn it will get off the Transform whenever it's at 1 health, and then the opposing Pokemon won't be able to move on the next turn because Smeargle will have imprisoned all of them out of using their own moves. I wasn't quite sure what Terra to slap on Smeargle, but I just decided to put Terra Dark on so that way we can avoid Prankster Taunt. Next up we have the Indeedee Male, and the Indeedee Male is going to be a Pokemon that we're using to do most of our damage here, as we are going to be setting up the Psychic Terrain to make it so that we are not being affected by priority ourselves, noticeably on Smeargle and Amogus and stuff. But also we are the choice spec set so that we can get off a lot of damage with our spread expanding force hopefully, but we also have that normal Terra Blast, which will turn into the fighting Terra Blast whenever we go Terra Fighting, and we have Shadow Ball specifically for trying to deal a lot of damage into Goldango, since Goldango's good as gold makes it so that it can't be affected by status moves, which includes Transform. But on Indeedee, we also have the ability to go for Trick, so we can use choice specs on a Pokemon, and then that forces it to only have one move, and then the fact that a Pokemon can only use one move makes it way easier to get rid of its one major attack if it's hopefully only has like 8 PP with our other PP reducing Pokemon. And it's especially good if we can trick the choice specs onto a physical attacker, because then they'll be getting absolutely no real use out of the choice specs. Next up we have Amoonguss, and Amoonguss is mainly here to support the team by throwing out the spores in order to put the opponent to sleep, to buy those viable turns that we need to get off the PP reducing strategies. But also the Rage Powder redirection is nice because it makes it less likely for Smeargle or any Pokemon on the team to get hit while it is doing their setup turns. But also, once a Pokemon is forced into struggling, we can use the Rage Powder to redirect their attacks into Amoonguss, and then since Struggle is a move that makes contact, the opposing Pokemon will take Rocky Helmet damage from Amoonguss, so we're hopefully saving Smeargle on 1 HP from a very unfortunate death there where it just gets struggled back. But if Amoonguss for whatever reason is faster than the opposing Pokemon, then we can go for the Pollen Puff into the Smeargle in order to get it back up in health and maybe have the actual ability to get some KOs. And we have Protect just to try and stall turns, because every turn that we go for Protect is one less PP that the opponent has. And we're Regenerator so that we can swap Amoonguss out in order to restore its health so that it can stay in the fight for longer. And we're Terra Water because water gives us a lot of good resistances. Next up we have Slowking, and whenever they made Galarian Slowking, they decided to give it a signature move called Eerie Spell, and whenever you hit a Pokemon with Eerie Spell, it is an 80 base power psychic type move, so it's like pretty decent damage, but it also removes 3p from the target's last move. And this is very obviously helpful in PV reducing strategies, because if a move has 8 PP, we can protect it in front of it first time, so then it goes down to 7 out of 8, and then they can use the move again in order to actually hit us, then they're 6 out of 8, and then we can Eerie Spell them again, so then they're at 3 out of 8, and then you can protect it again, and then you can maybe take it again, and then Eerie Spell it again. It's kind of long and convoluted, but eventually they'll run out of PP kind of quickly. Does speed up with our last 2 Pokemon though, as we'll talk about here in a sec. But since we're using Psychic Terrain, I also slotted on the Expanding Force just for some good stab Psychic type damage, and the Sludge Bomb is going to be our Poison type damage move for the Slowking. As well as Slowking also has the Regenerator, same out as Amoonguss, so we can keep swapping those 2 out and keep getting health, and we have the leftovers on Slowking so that Slowking is getting some natural recovery whenever it is on the field, and we're Terra Dark because of Prankster Taunt, but also because of the fact that we were previously weak to Ghost and Dark, and when we go Dark, we get to resist those things. Up next, we have Dusclops, and Dusclops finally gets to have a technically useful ability in the 128 teams challenge, because previously we had Frisk, and Frisk is only useful for discovering which Pokemon is Hisui and Zoroark in Open Team Sheet. But now we are going to be using Pressure, and Pressure makes it so that whenever the opposing Pokemon uses a move, the move will lose an additional PP, so they're basically losing PP twice as fast whenever we have a Pressure Pokemon, so that combos a little bit better with Slowking, because instead of having to take 2 hit turns of being hit by a move that has 8 PP, we can actually only be hit by the move once, because it'll take 2 the first time they use it whenever we protect them out, and then Eerie Spell them and take the move, which is 4, and then 3, and then you can protect again, and then that's 0. But on Dusclops, we can also speed this up even further because we have the move Spite, which is directly just a status move that allows us to lower the PP of the target's last move by 4. Then also for keeping Dusclops alive, we have the Pain Splits that make it so that we can share damage with the opponent, and we have the minimal HP investment so that we have the least amount of HP, so that whenever we Pain Split another Pokemon and we get a lot of HP back, we're basically going back to full health. And then we also have the Disable on Dusclops just in case the opponent is going for a really powerful move. We can disable them out of using it, and of course, since we have a good number of slower Pokemon, we have the Trick Room option on the Dusclops. And we're Eviolite on Dusclops because we're not a fully evolved Pokemon, and we're Terra Dark for the same reason that we were Terra Dark on Slowking, is the fact that we were weak to Ghost and Dark, and we want to not be weak to Ghost and Dark. It's also worth noting that there used to be a move in the game called Grudge, so that whenever a Pokemon got KO'd by the opposing Pokemon and it had already used Grudge in the turn, it would take away all of the PP of the opponent's move that it used to KO the Pokemon, which it was a pretty obscure move. But I want to say that Grudge would have been a little bit more useful than Spite, or at least a little bit more useful than Disable on this set, but it's kind of too bad that we don't have Grudge anymore, even though it was pretty useless. And lastly, we have Corviknight, who is just a really good stall Pokemon, as we are going to be using the Iron Defense stall strategy where we build up our defense, and since we're using Psychic Terrain, we can also use Psychic Seed in order to get a special defense boost on Corviknight, and then since Corviknight has a really good defensive typing that only allows us to be damaged by fire and electric types, we can just roost in front of a lot of Pokemon in order to get our health back, and since Corviknight also has pressure, it means that the opponent will be losing PP pretty fast, so hopefully what happens is that Corviknight is able to get up like one Iron Defense and then roost off all the damage that it's taking, and then when the opponent runs out of their strongest move for hitting Corviknight, Corviknight can afford to set up even more Iron Defenses and then just click Body Press into everything. And then of course we also have the Taunt on Corviknight just to brick Pokemon that want to go for status moves. And we are Terra Poison on Corviknight just because Dragon is kind of okay, like we don't really have much for dealing with ice on this team, so I decided to go with Poison so that we could still be neutral to ice, and Poison only has 2 weaknesses in Psychic and Ground, which we can kind of deal with all our other Pokemon. And before we get into the battles, I do want to again preface that this is a really gimmicky strategy, and I was pretty lucky to get the battles that I did get out of like I think I had like 12 or so battles, and these are 3 of probably the best ones of those 12 battles, so keep that in mind as we look at some battles. Alright, so first up we have what looks to be a Hisuian Typhlosion Sun team with a little bit of the Blood Moon Ursaluna Trick Room mode. And it really depends on what Pokemon they lead here. They do lead Clefairy and Ursaluna, which is pretty good for us with Dusclops and Amoonguss, as we can hopefully draw out a Blood Moon here, as I don't think a Blood Moon would KO Dusclops at full health here from the Ursaluna, but we could find out maybe. Clefairy's just going to follow me, and Amoonguss is thankfully just going to be able to protect the Blood Moon as Dusclops gets off the Trick Room, and now we can bring in Smeargle as Amoonguss starts to put things to sleep as Ursaluna goes for the Hyper Voice, and that brings Smeargle down to Sash, but now that Amoonguss is slower than Ursaluna and Clefairy isn't able to redirect, here we go for the Spore, and Ursaluna kind of buys us an extra turn here by going for that Protect, because we're just going to repeat the same turn again, but this time it's less important if it wakes up, and we get off the Imprison, so now we are transformed into Ursaluna, and I make a bit of a risk here saying that Clefairy or Ursaluna wasn't going to wake up, but both actually wake up on this team, and they get the struggle into Smeargle here. So Ursaluna does some damage to itself, but it just kind of erases the strategy. But we don't need the Trick Room right now because Hisuian Typhlosion and Whimsicott aren't on the field, so we just get off the Expanding Force and that is able to KO Ursaluna, as now Clefairy comes onto the field, and I bring in Dusclops because I did not want Amoonguss to take a Fire-type move, and indeed he looks to be faster, so it just gets the damage into Typhlosion. As Typhlosion gets a fairly weak Eruption into us, I bring back Amoonguss, seeing as how Typhlosion is probably going to KO'd here, and indeed he does pick up both KOs, and Fergaraf comes onto the field, and I was gonna use Spite into the Fergaraf over and over again in order to force it to kind of bend to our PP based strategy, but the opponent just decides to forfeit, seeing as that their Fergaraf is now asleep. Here we have a team with a really interesting mix of Mons. They have like the fact that they have Crocodile leads me to believe that they want to be like Moxie Crocodile in order to get a lot of like, KOs quickly. And the fact that they have Avalugg means that they probably have Bite Guard specifically for spamming Earthquake with their Crocodile. But the only thing that specifically threatens Corviknight on this team is the Archaludon if they have like Power Herb Electro Shot, and since they have Ninetales, they can go for the Blizzard spam, which wouldn't be great to us, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So we lead Amoonguss and Corviknight here as the opponent leads Crocodile and Flamigo, and I'm more than okay with this lead. Corviknight exerts pressure, which gets announced. Corviknight's Psychic Seed gets knocked off, but I don't think we brought in DD this game, so it doesn't matter. Corviknight gets off an Iron Defense as Flamigo gets off the Tailwind, and now they decide to bring in Ninetales here as we Rage Powder with Amoonguss, and Amoonguss just goes down to the Brave Bird despite all of the HP and defense that we have on it, as Flamigo takes a pretty good amount of damage from that Brave Bird and Rocky Helmet, and we get some decent damage into their Ninetales. Blizzard comes out, and Close Combat comes out, and Corviknight is just barely able to take both attacks, and we get off the Roost with Corviknight restoring our health, and we get Sludge Bomb into their Ninetales, taking out one of the major threats to our Corviknight, and they decide to bring Crocodile back to the
the field, who gets down another Intimidate, but we protect Slowking here just to get a little bit of lefties and hope that they didn't double Corviknight, and Flamigo is constantly making itself weaker, but their close combat also only has 8 PP, which is their best thing for hitting Corviknight. So Corviknight, theoretically right now, only needs to take 2 more close combats from the Flamigo, and then it becomes very hard for Flamigo to remove Corviknight, and Crookedowl's seems like its best move is Knock Off for hitting Pokemon, and it might be Scarf at this point. Not exactly sure about the Scarf on Crookedowl, but if it is Scarf, it makes things a lot easier, because then it also really doesn't have a move for hitting Corviknight. But the opponent's Tailwind runs out here, and we go Terra Dark on Slowking, so that Slowking lives the knockoff, losing our leftovers, and they decide to set up the Tailwind with Flamigo as we rest with Corviknight here, and we get the Eerie spell in order to take out Flamigo, so Flamigo actually never runs out of close combats. And the opponent just decides to give up after that, as I'm assuming the Pokemon that they had in the back was either Tentacruel or Avalugg, and neither of them can probably beat Corviknight at this point, since especially Crookedowl's probably permanently locked into Knockoff now. But as you saw in that game, it was way more effective for us to just KO the Flamigo rather than wait out for close combats in order for Flamigo to run out of moves to hit Corviknight. Alright, so here we have an actual opposing Corviknight team, which is a pretty good end for us, whose Corviknight's basically like the center point, even though everybody's super gimmicky. Corviknight's probably the most consistent damage that we have on the team. But they are also an Expanding Force team, and their Espeon is probably faster than our Indeedee, which can threaten us a lot. And they have Weather, which we don't have, and they have a Pseudo-Legendary. Actually, they have 2 Pseudo-Legendaries, which we don't have that either. But they decide to lead with Indeedee and Espeon, as we lead with Corviknight and Amoonguss, and I'm relatively okay with this. Like, we do get to activate the Psychic Seed on Corviknight for the Spadef boost, but they immediately decide to Terra Psychic their Espeon and just go for the Expanding Force, and Amoonguss was not living that in any universe. I wanted to go for it just in case they did not decide to keep in Espeon there, but Amoonguss probably wasn't doing much this game anyways. Like, it would have been nice to get the Spore into their Indeedee to maybe stop them from helping handing for Corviknight, but a free swap into Indeedee here is also very valuable. As Espeon goes for Expanding Force, and Indeedee and Corviknight both live it, and we throw back our own Expanding Force, doing just over half to Espeon, as Corviknight is roosting, and Espeon is theoretically running out of Expanding Forces by the moment. Of course, our team is also running out of health by the moment that this goes on. We bring in Slowking here, as the opponent did a really funny thing there that we saw, where I don't think they intended to do it, where they tried to Heal Pulse their Espeon, but Espeon is Magic Bounce, and Magic Bounce the Heal Pulse back to Indeedee, so... But now we have Corviknight and Slowking backs against the walls, 4 against 2, taking these Expanding Forces, just roosting off the damage, and Indeedee decides to go for the Trick Room here for whatever reason, but we Terra Dark our Slowking in order for Slowking to start throwing back some Expanding Forces, and Body Press brings Indeedee down pretty low as Espeon throws out its Expanding Force. They decide to swipe in Lycanroc here as the Psychic Terrain runs out, and they probably didn't want to get hit with their Espeon so that they can stall out the Trick Room. But now they bring in their Sand Mode, and we get Eerie Spell into Lycanroc, who's not yet used a move. But Corviknight is more than okay with body pressing into things. Close combat is going to bring Slowking to the edge of death, and so is the Sand Chip, but thankfully we're left over so we can survive the Sand Chip, and Lycanroc protects out the last turn of Trick Room. But we get Eerie Spell into Espeon, and we're body pressing into Lycanroc. So at this point, the only thing that the opponent can rely on is the Rock Slide flinching. So we protect Slowking so that this Rock Slide is going to be spread damage, and thankfully Corviknight does not flinch, and we get the body press into Lycanroc. So yet another game where we ended up taking a lot of attacks, and I don't even think that we stalled out like half of the Espeon's Expanding Forces. But yeah, that was the PP Wars team, and if I'm being honest, the strategy, I mean, it's obviously the 96 team, so it's not a great strategy inherently, but it really feels like the developers of Pokemon are trying to have something going here, with the fact that like, even as late as Generation 8, they're still introducing moves that reduce the PP of the opponent's moves. It's just like, there's just so much PP that it's basically never worth it. Like, it's definitely more of a single strategy in order to try and reduce your opponent's PP by just spamming moves at them, in order to try and better target, like, their healing moves, which is probably also why they reduced the PP of healing moves in this generation overall. Oh, and another thing that's worth noting is that this is technically a better on-cart strategy, since Pokemon Showdown sets all move PPs to be their maximum, and I actually don't know if there's a way on Pokemon Showdown to change the PPs of moves. But if you were to build the same team on cart, it would do slightly better, because not every team that is built on the actual game is going to have all of their moves PP maxed. And so therefore it is easier to win the PP war on cartridge. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video and even consider subscribing, because both of those things would help me out an absolute ton. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.